In 1697, a massive fire broke out at the Royal Library, housed in the Tre Kronor Castle in Stockholm. The library held around 25,000 books and 14,000 manuscripts. Tragically, only a quarter of them survived the blaze. As flames engulfed the building, desperate library staff began tossing valuable books out of the windows to save them. One of those books hit a bystander on the head and nearly killed him. Sounds dramatic, right? But this wasn't just any book. This one could actually crush someone. It measured 3 feet in length, 20 inches in width, and nearly 9 inches thick. It had 320 pages and weighed a staggering 175 pounds. That's heavier than an average adult person's suitcase. Because of its sheer size, it was named the Codex Gigas, which literally means giant book in Latin. The Codex Gigas holds the title of the largest surviving medieval illuminated manuscript in existence. This remarkable work is an extensive compilation featuring a wide array of texts. It contains the complete Old and New Testaments, offering a thorough religious foundation. Beyond the Bible, the manuscript includes the writings of Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian whose works shed light on the history of the Jewish people. It also features Isidore of Seville's Etymologies, an essential text of ancient knowledge, covering a vast range of subjects including linguistics, science, and history. Another significant section is Ars Medicinae, a medieval medical treatise that provides valuable insights into the medical practices of the time, offering remedies and treatments for various ailments. Additionally, the manuscript holds the Chronica Bohemorum, a 12th century chronicle by Cosmas of Prague, which chronicles the history of the Bohemian region. It also includes a calendar listing the feast days of saints and notable Bohemian figures, marking the days they were celebrated in the region. So far, it sounds like a well-organized medieval encyclopedia, right? But then, things take a dark turn. On page 290, the book features a full-page illustration of the devil. This disturbing image earned the manuscript its infamous nickname, the Devil's Bible. Following the depiction of the devil, the Codex Gigas introduces sections dedicated to black magic, exorcism rituals, and necromancy, which is the practice of communicating with the dead. Today, the Codex Gigas rests safely in the National Library of Sweden, enclosed in a glass case and rarely touched. But its origins trace back to what is now the Czech Republic, and it carries with it some serious stories. In the 13th century, in the region of Bohemia, stood the Benedictine monastery of Podlages. It was there that a monk named Hermann the Recluse lived. According to legend, Hermann broke the sacred vows of the monastery. As punishment, he was sentenced to be walled up alive, left to die of thirst and starvation. In a desperate plea for mercy, Hermann promised to create a book in one night so magnificent, so complete, that it would glorify the monastery for all time. A book that would contain all human knowledge. His punishment was delayed, and he was given the night to complete the task. Hermann began writing, but as midnight approached, he realized he couldn't do it. In utter desperation, he recited an ancient spell, and according to the tale, the devil himself appeared. Hermann made a pact.
"Write me the book, and my soul is yours."
By morning, the giant manuscript lay finished, bound in leather, and said to be made from the skins of over 160 donkeys. The Codex Gigas was born. People were so astonished by the book that at one point it was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. What makes it even more mysterious is the level of perfection in its execution. There are no spelling mistakes, no blotted ink, and the handwriting is flawlessly consistent throughout all 320 pages. Forensic handwriting experts agree. The entire manuscript appears to have been written by a single person. The National Library of Sweden puts the scale of this achievement into perspective.
If the scribe worked 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, the manuscript could have taken about 5 years to complete. If he was a monk, likely working only 3 hours a day, it might have taken 10 years. And since the same person ruled the lines and decorated the manuscript as well, it's estimated the whole process could have taken at least 20 years, possibly even 30.
But here's the strange part. If one person really wrote it over 20 to 30 years, starting in their 20s and continuing into their 50s, the handwriting should have changed over time. That's normal. Even subtle shifts in pressure, style, or rhythm would be expected. But in the Codex Gigas, the writing is perfectly uniform, from the first word to the last. All this tells us that it is the work of the devil himself. As an illuminated manuscript, the Codex Gigas features numerous illustrations and decorative elements throughout its pages. Many of these drawings are striking, but the most famous are the full-page depictions of the devil and the heavenly city, which are placed in stark contrast to one another. The devil is portrayed as a massive, monstrous figure dominating the entirety of hell. His large claws extend outward, his red-tipped horns rise above his head, and his small red eyes glow ominously. His green face is twisted in an unsettling expression, and his two long red tongues hang down. He crouches between two imposing towers, wearing an ermine loincloth, a material typically reserved for royalty, possibly alluding to the devil's status as the Prince of Darkness. While depictions of the devil were common in medieval art, this image stands out due to its size and solitary presentation, occupying an entire page. Opposite the devil is the full-page portrayal of the heavenly city. It is depicted with tiered buildings, towering structures, and red walls that surround the city. Just like the devil's image, it features two large towers on either side, offering a visual symmetry between the two illustrations. The heavenly city is intended to evoke hope and salvation, offering a stark contrast to the evil represented by the devil. Together, these illustrations likely serve as a meditation on the consequences of one's actions, a reminder of what awaits after death, depending on whether one leads a virtuous or sinful life. The text before the heavenly city discusses penitence, while the passage after the devil is focused on exorcisms. Within these leaves are rituals, instructions, and many magical formulas that, the Codex claims, expel evil from possessed bodies. Yet these are plainly forms of magic. If you have watched my chapters on Kabbalah and Shams al-Ma'arif, you will recognize the pattern. Such rituals and formulas are drawn from the science of letters, numerical sequences, letter mysticism, and geometric patterns. According to these systems, the patterns channel unseen energies or entities into our world. And, as with Kabbalah and Shams al-Ma'arif, the Codex dresses its methods in the language of service to humanity. Beneath that language, however, lies the same dark art, rituals that summon unseen entities. One common claim across all three is that they can summon angels for protection. I found no authentic historical report of a man summoning angels for righteous ends. I believe these claims to be false. Angels are not summoned by such rituals and formulas. Whatever power these books promise comes from dark methods, not divine assistance. The medical texts in the Codex Gigas stand out for their unsettling undertones. On the surface, they appear practical. Remedies for fever, treatments for illness, dietary advice, and prescriptions drawn from the medical knowledge of the time. Yet these writings are often entangled with astrology and the belief that unseen forces shape the human body, echoing the same ideas found in Kabbalah and Shams al-Ma'arif. Within these pages, the boundary between medicine and magic begins to blur. Simple remedies using herbs or minerals are paired with ritual-like instructions, invoking prayers or protective words to ensure the cure's success. Even in the realm of healing, a shadow remains, the suggestion that every sickness hides a spiritual threat, and that herbs alone could never be enough to drive it away. Even its calendar of saints and festivals, an otherwise ordinary feature of monastic books, takes on a dark tone in this context. The Codex Gigas includes a complete calendar listing the festivals of saints and other liturgical observances. To a medieval monk, this was a daily guide for prayer and ritual. Each entry signaled when to fast, when to celebrate, and when to honor the memory of martyrs and apostles. Yet calendars also had a secondary role. They were tied to the lunar cycle and to seasonal change. By listing dates in sequence, they became a way of charting time, not only in human terms, but in cosmic terms. The movement of the sun across the zodiac, the phases of the moon, and the shifting seasons all intersected with the liturgical year. In practice, this meant that saints' days were often associated with weather, agriculture, and fortune. For example, farmers looked to specific feast days as markers for planting and harvest. Travelers consulted calendars to determine which days were considered unlucky or auspicious for journeys. Over centuries, layers of folklore grew around the liturgical calendar, blending saints' feasts with astrological belief. Within the Codex Gigas, this mingling is implicit. The holy days stand written in monumental script, but behind them is the unspoken rhythm of the stars, suggesting once again that the sacred and the occult were never far apart in this book. The connection between the Codex's calendar and astrology becomes clearer when paired with Isidore of Seville's Etymology, which is copied in full within the manuscript. In this vast encyclopedia, Isidore devotes sections to the structure of the cosmos, the movements of the heavenly bodies, and the practices of astrology. Isidore explains how ancient peoples divided the sky into constellations, how they named the planets, and how they believed celestial movements influenced the natural world. He lists the forms of divination that relied on the stars, describing how astrologers claimed to read a person's fate in the arrangement of the heavens at their birth. For example, Isidore recounts the belief that the moon influences not only tides, but also human health. He describes the idea that certain phases of the moon were favorable for medical procedures, while others brought risk. He notes that eclipses were read as omens of disaster, and that planetary conjunctions were said to herald great events in the affairs of kings. By preserving these descriptions, the Codex Gigas allowed its readers to see the intimate link between time, astronomy, and human destiny. Once again, the parallels with Kabbalah and Shams al-Ma'arif become clear. Both systems place heavy importance on the movements of the stars and the phases of the moon, insisting that each alignment carries distinct effects on human life. The Codex Gigas reflects this same belief. According to these occult traditions, the heavens were not just a backdrop, but a living clock, each moment unlocking a different doorway to the unseen. From this idea grew the rituals and formulas said to summon entities tied to specific celestial moments. With every phase of the moon, a new presence was claimed to appear, spirits or forces that could be drawn into our world through carefully timed incantations and symbols.
It is, at its core, a pure form of dark magic disguised as sacred knowledge.
The Devil's Bible seemed to carry a curse wherever it went. Not long after it was created, its birthplace, the Podlages Monastery, was destroyed. But somehow the book always managed to survive. Recognizing its value, the Cistercian Sedlec Abbey, one of the wealthiest and most powerful monasteries in Bohemia, acquired the Codex Gigas before Podlegis met its end. But wherever the book went, death and destruction followed. In the mid-14th century, the Black Death swept through the region, wiping out half of Europe's population. The death toll was so overwhelming that there wasn't enough space to bury the dead. In response, the monks of Sedlec made a chilling decision. They began exhuming old graves, combining remains from past and present, and storing the bones in a dedicated space, an ossuary. Over 40,000 human skeletons were said to be stored in the ossuary. But the monks didn't stop at simply stacking bones. They turned death into design. They transformed human remains into haunting works of art, decorating the chapel with bone chandeliers, walls lined with femurs, and pyramids made entirely of skulls. Rib cages, spines, and leg bones were arranged into elaborate patterns and towering structures. But perhaps the most disturbing piece of all was the Schwarzenberg coat of arms, including a raven pecking out the eye of a skull. From the Sedlec monastery, the Codex Gigas was transferred to the renowned Břevnov monastery in Prague, the capital of Bohemia. There, it remained under the care of monks for nearly 3 centuries. But the Devil's Bible always seemed to attract the gaze of power. And this time, it caught the eye of one of the most curious minds in history, Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. Rudolf was no ordinary ruler. He was a collector of strange and advanced artifacts, with a deep obsession for alchemy, astrology, and the occult. He often locked himself away in his chamber, surrounded by relics, staring at them for hours in silence, as if searching for hidden truths. So when he heard of a massive book filled with exorcisms, magical formulas, healing rituals, and even a full-page portrait of the devil, he had to have it. Rudolf moved the capital of the Holy Roman Empire from Vienna to Prague, turning the city into a hub for mystics, alchemists, and scholars, and there he pressured the monks of Břevnov into loaning him the Codex Gigas, but it was never returned. Rudolf added the Devil's Bible to his personal collection. He was mesmerized by it. To him, it wasn't just a book, it was a source of power. His obsession with the occult soon earned him a chilling nickname, the Mad Alchemist Emperor. And then, as with all who came too close to the Devil's Bible, things began to fall apart. His empire was plagued by revolts, political instability, and war with the Ottomans. One blow after another weakened his rule, until finally his own brother stripped him of his titles. Rudolf was king, no more. And in his final words to the people, he said,
"I gave you knowledge, and you gave me betrayal."
After the death of Emperor Rudolf II in 1612, Europe was engulfed in the chaos of the 30 Years' War led by Queen Christina of Sweden. It was such a brutal and complex conflict that it led to the deaths of over 8 million people. Prague became a target in the final stages of the war. In 1648, Swedish forces, under General Hans Christoph von Königsmarck, launched a surprise attack and successfully stormed Prague Castle, taking advantage of the city's weakened defenses. The Swedes ransacked the castle's treasures, making off with vast collections of art, scientific instruments, manuscripts, and rare books, many of which had belonged to Rudolf II himself. Queen Christina was a brilliant ruler with a fascination, almost a mania, for collecting books. She had heard of the Devil's Bible and was determined to add it to her collection. When Swedish forces raided Prague, they recovered the Codex Gigas from the treasure trove of Emperor Rudolf II, and the massive manuscript was brought back to Sweden. It was housed first in Queen Christina's personal library, and later moved to the Swedish Royal Library in Stockholm. But again, the book came not alone. It brought ruin with it. After 22 years on the throne, Queen Christina converted to Catholicism, renounced her crown, and spent the rest of her days in Rome, living as a guest of the Pope. In 1697, a massive fire broke out at the Royal Library in Stockholm. Once again, the Codex Gigas managed to survive the flames, though not without some scars. The book was thrown out of a window to save it, and it still bears the marks of that fire. 3 days after the incident, a formal trial was held to determine the cause of the wildfire. The chief fire watcher and his 2 assistants were found guilty of negligence for not being at their posts during the critical time and were sentenced to death. Yet, despite the verdict, the true origin of the wildfire was never conclusively identified. After the fire at the Royal Library, the manuscript passed from one location to another, eventually finding its home at the National Library of Sweden, where it remains today. The Codex Gigas originally contained 320 vellum leaves, but at some point in its long and shadowy history, 10 of those leaves were removed, including what appears to be a single, deliberately excised page that came right after the full-page portrait of the devil. According to some, those excised leaves held the spell, the ritual, or even the invocation itself that Hermann used to call upon the devil. In 1858, a curious tale was recounted in Tocreliga Anecdoter, Hilarious Anecdotes. It tells the story of the National Library's caretaker who, after a long day's work, fell asleep in the main hall of the library. When he awoke, he was met with an unbelievable sight. The books seemed to come alive. They crawled down from the shelves, swirling and dancing through the air in a wild, chaotic waltz. The books surrounded the Devil's Bible. The next morning, the library staff found the caretaker in a state of shock, trembling under a table. He was utterly terrified, unable to speak coherently. As the days passed, his condition worsened, and he was eventually deemed feeble-minded, ultimately being sent to the madhouse. In 2007, the Devil's Bible was loaned to the Czech Republic and displayed in the National Library. Visitors were allowed to view the book, but only for a maximum of 10 minutes. Today, the Codex Gigas resides in the National Library of Sweden, safely encased in a glass display, and it is rarely removed. As I mentioned earlier, the book also carries leaves that speak of the history of the Jews. This comes mainly through a Latin translation of Flavius Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, a vast chronicle of old and one of the most valued sources for understanding Jewish history in the Middle Ages. Flavius Josephus was born in Jerusalem in 37 CE, a member of a priestly family. He lived through one of the most turbulent eras in Jewish history, the period of the Jewish revolt against Rome. At first, he fought against the Romans, commanding Jewish forces in Galilee, but when captured, he switched allegiance and entered Roman service. Under the patronage of the Flavian emperors, he wrote several works in Greek, explaining Jewish traditions and history to a Greco-Roman audience. Among them, Antiquities of the Jews was the most ambitious. Written around 93-94 CE, its 20 volumes retell the history of the Jewish people from creation all the way to the Jewish revolt of 66 CE. Josephus begins with Genesis. Like the Bible, he tells the story of creation, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and the generations that followed. But Josephus does not simply copy the biblical text. He explains. For example, he describes Adam as not only the first man, but as one who passed down knowledge of agriculture and the sciences. He notes that the descendants of Cain founded cities, giving a more elaborate description of the spread of human society. When Josephus turns to Prophet Abraham, he casts him not merely as a patriarch, but as a philosopher. He emphasizes Abraham's reasoning powers, his rejection of idolatry, and his discovery that the world must be ruled by a single God. In Josephus's retelling, Abraham appears as both a man of faith and a thinker, bridging the world of scripture with the world of philosophy. The central figure of Jewish history after the patriarchs is Moses, and in Josephus's Antiquities, he receives extensive treatment. The Codex Gigas preserves Josephus's long retelling of Moses' birth, his adoption by Pharaoh's daughter, his leadership of Israel, and the giving of the law. Once again, Josephus expands upon the biblical narrative. He presents Moses as a wise lawgiver, a prophet, and even a skilled general who led the Israelites in battles against their enemies. Josephus pays particular attention to the law of Moses, presenting it not only as divine command but also as a system of justice, comparable to the legal codes admired by Greeks and Romans. As Josephus's history moves forward, it covers the period of the Israelite monarchy, the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, the reign of kings such as Saul, David, and Solomon, and the division of the kingdom into Israel and Judah. His retelling often elaborates on the biblical accounts, inserting details about diplomacy, warfare, and politics. For example, in describing Solomon, Josephus not only praises his wisdom, but also elaborates on the splendor of his court and the reach of his alliances. The Temple of Jerusalem is described in almost architectural detail, emphasizing its magnificence and centrality to Jewish life. Two of the most famous passages in Josephus's Antiquities occur in the sections dealing with the early 1st century CE. Josephus refers to John the Baptist, describing him as a righteous man who urged people to virtue and baptism. He also records that Herod had John executed, fearing his influence over the crowds. The more controversial passage is the Testimonium Flavianum, where Josephus refers to Jesus. In its preserved form, it describes Jesus as a wise man, a doer of miraculous works, a teacher, and the one called Christ, who was crucified under Pontius Pilate. These words in the Codex stand out as strange, for the Jews have long opposed the prophet Jesus. They sought to strip away his honor, even to take his life, but God, in his power, saved him. In the same era the Devil's Bible emerged, another unsettling tale unfolded just 30 miles north of Prague, at the mysterious Hauska Castle. What makes this castle so peculiar is that, unlike typical fortresses, it was never meant to keep invaders out. Its defenses face inward, as if designed to keep something inside. The modern stone structure was constructed around 1270, not long after the Codex Gigas was completed, but the story of Hauska Castle stretches much further back. According to local historians, the original structure dating back to around 870 was made of wood, built atop a large stone. One day, that stone cracked open, and that's when the strange events began. Locals reported terrifying winged creatures emerging from the fissure. A foul stench of sulfur filled the air. Crops failed. Animals disappeared or grew ill. Something dark was rising, and people believed that this crack in the earth was nothing less than a gateway to hell itself. To contain the growing evil, a second structure was built centuries later. The stone castle of 1270 was designed with one central purpose: to seal the crack. Right above it, the builders constructed a chapel, a sacred space meant to keep the evil locked beneath. Inside the chapel, disturbing frescoes and symbols were painted, warning of the horrors that would be unleashed should the gate ever reopen. Tony McMahon, a historian who studied the site, revealed one of the darker traditions of Hauska. Prisoners were offered a grim choice: face execution by torture or be lowered into the crack beneath the chapel. One man accepted the challenge, but moments after he was lowered in, he began to scream in terror. When he was pulled back up, he was pale, trembling, and had gone completely mad. Whatever he saw in that darkness left him broken, forever. In 1938, during World War II, the Nazis arrived at Hauska Castle under the command of Heinrich Himmler. Himmler had a deep obsession with the occult and believed that dark forces could be used to gain power. When he heard the old legends about the castle being built over a gate to hell, he took special interest in it. The Nazis took over the castle and turned it into a site for twisted experiments. Prisoners were brought in, tortured, and used in dark rituals. What's really strange is that, around the same time in Prague, there were two creepy stories floating around, both tied to the devil. One was about the Codex Gigas, the massive book people say was written in a single night with the devil's help. The other was about Hauska Castle, where a crack in the ground was believed to be a literal gateway to hell. It makes you wonder, what was going on back then? Maybe it wasn't just coincidence. Maybe something dark really was hanging over that land, something that left behind a cursed book and a hole in the earth no one was ever supposed to open. Whether or not the Devil's Bible was truly written by the devil, one undeniable aspect of it is that it contains occult knowledge. The term occult refers to things hidden from ordinary sight or understanding, concealed from the public eye. This is the nature of many occult books. Forbidden knowledge and dark secrets are often veiled by seemingly harmless or even beneficial content. Take the Devil's Bible, for example. It contains the Old and New Testaments, the history of Bohemia, and medical works. To the unknowing reader, it might appear to be just another book filled with familiar, accessible knowledge. But suddenly, the book reveals a disturbing image of the devil, followed by dark magic formulas, forbidden spells, and other occult content. In this way, readers unknowingly venture from common knowledge into dangerous, hidden territory. This is why one must exercise caution and refrain from reading occult books, for what begins as seemingly harmless may quickly lead you into a dark and unknowable realm.